Welcome to How You Breathe is How You Live, a podcast dedicated to the radical idea that your life doesn't change until you live the truth. They say the truth will set you free, but they usually forget to mention it's probably going to hurt your feelings and piss you off first. I'm Jake, the founder of Breath.Energy, the world's first dedicated breathwork studio, and here we explore the deep architecture of the human experience. We aren't here just to talk about your struggles, because there is no struggle, and the struggle is real. We're here to update the internal software that's been running the show since you were 5 years old. Whether we're diving into archetypes, self-awareness, anatomy, or transcendence, our goal is the same: to move you from survive to thrive. Because at the end of the day, how you breathe really is how you live. We're continuing our 10-part series on shadow work. Last week we talked about the perfectionist, that quiet internal voice that says, if I'm perfect, I'm safe. This week is different. If perfectionism is a battle with yourself, control is a battle with the world. Today we're looking at the controller shadow, the part of us that believes if we can manage every variable, nothing bad can happen. We'll explore why you feel the need to rewrite other people's work, why unpredictability haunts you, and how this survival strategy is actually preventing the relief and connection you crave. It's time to find out what your grip is costing you. If you've ever taken a mouse out of someone's hands because they weren't clicking fast enough, this episode is for you. Well, it's also right up there with my second ceremony where they said I was blue, and I was like, that was not wasn't the spiritual image I was shooting for.
That was not the spirit.
Yeah, I was hoping to get something a little better to put the marketing push behind.
Nah, that's perfect.
Sadly, right up there with Jamie, thinking he's a wolf, and I'm like, temple pug at best. At best.
Still one of the best stories.
Yeah. To see how hurt his feelings were, and then he stormed off, and then to come back 2 weeks later and go, I'm a temple pug. Yes. Yes, we are. So last week we talked about the shadow of the perfectionist, the quiet internal pressure, the voice that says, if I'm perfect, I'm safe. This week is just slightly different. Because if perfectionism is a battle with yourself, control is a battle with the world. The perfectionist turns the pressure inward. I should have done better. I missed something. This isn't ready yet. The controller turns the pressure outward. Why didn't they follow the plan? Why is this so hard to manage? If I don't step in, this will go sideways. It's the same tension, but with a different focus. A perfectionist rewrites their own work 5 times, and a controller rewrites your work. A perfectionist is haunted by mistakes. A controller is haunted by unpredictability. The perfectionist thinks, if I'm flawless, I can't be judged. And the controller thinks, if I manage every variable, nothing bad can happen. Many controllers started out as perfectionists. They just realized that to get it right, using air quotes here again, they had to start managing everyone else. Now, not every controller is a perfectionist, and not every perfectionist is a controller, but their Venn diagram does have a strong overlap. They're not exactly the same circle, but it's pretty close. That's when high standards become tight control. It's when excellence turns into pressure. So here's the question for today's episode. Are you upset because the quality standard hasn't been met or isn't good enough? Or because it wasn't done your way? Because this episode, again, it isn't about lowering your standards, although that may be a good idea in some situations. It's about understanding where your pressure goes and what it's costing you. The same strength, the same drive, but a very different shadow. So how does the controller show up in day-to-day life? I've personally never met a control freak who identified as a control freak. Not freaking once. They see themselves as understanding what needs to happen and that no one else does. They take charge naturally, not because they crave power, but because their nervous system relaxes when they're directing the flow. And this is kind of how it looks in everyday life. At work, they tend to take over meetings when they feel the momentum slipping. They finish other people's sentences or their decisions for them. They give, I'm using air quotes here again, helpful suggestions that are actually commands. They reorganize systems that were already working. They get frustrated when people improvise or change the plan. And they believe clarity comes from telling, not asking. And again, they often believe that everything would fall apart without them holding it all together. And because of that, I think one of their biggest nightmares is that they're going to go on vacation and the place didn't burn to the ground while they were gone. Now, some of their characteristics are they have strong directive energy that naturally takes the lead. They step in quickly when things feel inefficient, unclear, or off track. They communicate very bluntly and with urgency, that they push people beyond their comfort zones, often before they're ready. They thrive in high-pressure situations, conflict, or competition, and because of this, they often create high-pressure situations and conflict. They become energized by solving the impossible. They like managing a crisis, and surprise, surprise, there are a lot of crises. There are a lot of tough situations in their life.
That was beautiful.
They intimidate people without intending to. They're surprised when others feel hurt, overwhelmed, or shut down. They tend to micromanage details while holding a big picture vision. And they connect through challenge and action rather than emotion or empathy. To the controller, this feels like leadership. To others, it often feels like being micromanaged or overridden. Their internal thoughts are that you're either in control or you are out of control or being controlled. That if they don't step in, everything will fall apart. That they are the only one who's willing to take responsibility and seize the entire overview of the situation. And that other people want them to take charge even if they don't say it. And that if they relax, something bad will happen. And that no one is going to tell me what to do. These thoughts aren't arrogance. They're a version of hypervigilance, which is also a shadow that we'll cover later on, that is an aspect of controlling. Internally, it feels like confidence, but to other people, it lands like the controller has a lack of confidence in them, and it's a bit undermining. The feelings that they live with, that they have a high baseline of anxiety when things aren't going the way that they want them to go, that they're impatient with other people's emotions, pace, or methods, and irritation when people don't, using air quotes again, get it quickly, and they get angry when their authority is challenged, and they have a sense of being burdened with more than their share. They often take on more of the work than is theirs, and occasionally feelings of being hurt or rejection or being underappreciated, that people rarely acknowledge the controller's efforts because of how they go about doing those efforts. It doesn't leave much room for back patting or telling them good job. They've sucked all the joy out of the process and the way that they get there. So no one ever says, good job, champ. Their emotional world is very narrow, but intense. There's little room for softness without fear of losing control. And they justify all this. They tell themselves stories that make that control feel necessary, that without me, nothing would get done. And if it did get done, it certainly wouldn't get done right. That people need to be pushed to perform, and I'm just trying to get this job done for everyone's sake. And if I don't control this, I'll be controlled, and that's unacceptable. Standards matter, feelings are secondary, and each lie contains a grain of truth, which is why they're convincing. But over time, they cost more than they deliver in trust and connection and in peace and actually in results as well. You know, one of the things there, the very first time I got, I'm using air quotes here again, promoted to a management job, I was basically given the option of I could be the manager or they would hire someone else to be the manager and that they would manage me. And I was like, well, that sounds terrible. I had been working at the job for 2 or 3 years with no manager. There was a department and we just all did our own stuff. And they're like, you can be in charge or we'll hire someone else. And I was like, I don't want to be a manager, but I guess that beats someone else telling me what to do. Sure.
I don't want to be a manager. I want to be managed even less.
Correct. I would like even less oversight than I have.
Like less responsibility
Yes.
and more money, please.
Yeah, yes. Sadly, the CEO did not see it that way.
Oh, no.
No, he did
Crazy.
not. Yeah. I mean, we still only talked once a month. Yeah. A controller isn't trying to dominate. They're trying to prevent collapse. But when control becomes the only way to feel safe, it slowly turns leadership into pressure and strength into strain. And that's the doorway to integration, not by becoming weaker, but by learning how to stay powerful without staying tense and tight all the time. Have either of you ever been on the receiving end of that kind of energy, and do you have a story about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just working in the corporate world. You run into a lot of people that, have that school of thought of this is the way we've always done it.
Mm-hmm.
And when that starts to become inefficient, I've had experiences where it's almost like now because the process is becoming inefficient for whatever reason, it's like they're scared. They're scared because change is coming, and change always brings unknown, right? There was one manager in particular, when you said sucking the joy out of just completing regular work tasks, there was one manager in particular who doesn't work in our department anymore. But he was a manager for a larger team that I had to work with pretty regularly. And he was my first experience with, we would be on a phone in a meeting and we're just trying to figure something out. And for the most part, like the people that knew what was going on were speaking. And he would just pipe up with like a 2-minute like monologue, half of which had nothing to do with what was going on. And the people that knew what we were talking about knew that, but he's the manager. And when he was done talking, I could feel over the phone. Keep in mind, we are on like a Zoom call and you can just feel the complete energy depletion. Nobody wants to be here anymore. Nobody wanted to do this before we were doing it because it was part of our job. And now nobody really wants to do this.
Right.
I've had experiences on varying levels of that, but that person in particular was just like to the point that I wondered if he knew what he was doing because he was good at it. Good God, I bet nobody wants to be around you ever unless we're only doing what you want and everything's going your way.
Right.
It sounds awful.
Yeah.
So definitely something that hasn't happened in a long time, but something I will never forget.
Yeah, we had an owner of one company. The sales manager called him the great sales demotivator. That every time he talked to us, he was like, "Man, it's going to take me 2 weeks to get these guys back on track after this." It became entertaining because our manager, the guy who was working with us, was at least self-aware. Was like, "All right, guys, so that just happened. Let's go ahead and erase the whiteboard and carry on like this didn't happen." I think one of the things that comes to mind for me in personal situations is having a mother that like wants Thanksgiving dinner to be like a Hallmark moment and everything has to be perfect. And then of course nothing is perfect and that ruins everything. And then it just descends into complete and total chaos because every element that was supposed to be controlled was not controlled. And yeah, it was
No Kodak moments.
No Kodak moments there. Yeah, like it 30 or 40 years removed, it is hilarious. In the moment, it's, can I just go to my room and not be, can I be excused
Just
from
take my
participation
yams
in
and
this
leave.
family?
Yeah, if I close my eyes hard enough, can I just disappear? Yeah, dig.
Me and the other kids always fought about whether we were adopted or not, with all of us trying to claim we were the one that was adopted. I'm not related to any of you. I gotta get the heck out of here. You're adopted. God, I wish I was.
My mom was very much the story of my wife at the time, now ex-wife. Wow. It was like some Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving or some family dinner thing. And my mom, she offered to help chop mushrooms or something, mushrooms. And she knows that my mom is very particular about lots of things, and asked, "Is there any particular way you'd like them cut?" And she explicitly says, "No, any way is fine." And so she starts cutting them one way, and within 30 seconds, as like half of them are done, my mom comes over and like takes the knife out of her hand, just like, no, this way. And I was like, I literally just watched you say, it doesn't matter how you cut these. And like, no self-awareness.
Well, that goes back to my original statement of I have never met a control freak, not once, who's self-identified as a control freak. You're like, you're a control freak. And they're like, no, I'm not.
Not me.
Not me. I'm go with the flow as long as the flow notifies us of the schedule 3 weeks in advance and doesn't make any changes.
It's interesting to reflect on it because like I definitely have had plenty of moments would probably be labeled as a control, and then many moments that the behavior is very similar, but I don't think it would be labeled that way. And the difference internally is confidence and competence in whatever it is that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And like I have a business partner in particular who's very confident and I don't think anyone would call him a control freak. In fact, it's like, can we get him to do more because he's so good at everything?
Right.
I think that's because he's just the master of that domain. And looking back on times when like, oh yeah, I was definitely exhibiting this behavior, it's coming from a place of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
I need to impose this will to convince myself that I'm in control or know what I'm doing. Is that like an internal marker of the different actual, like these are high standards for a reason that we're trying to hold versus I'm trying to oppose?
I think, again, it boils back down to, are you dissatisfied with the result? Or are you dissatisfied with how the result was achieved? And I think if you're dissatisfied with how the result was achieved, that is the mark of a controller. And, one of the things about the 10 different shadows is they're on a spectrum. And part of the reasons they're your shadow and not your ego is that if it's your shadow, it's part of you that you're repressing, hiding, and trying to like not be that way. And at various times, you're not going to show up that way all the time. But when somebody pushes the right button, puts you in the right circumstances, creates the right sense of fear, anxiety in you, now it comes out and like it has to do this. Early on in my healing journey, I noticed that most of the time I was okay. And then every once in a while I would have an incident where I would spaz out and what do they call it now? Crash out. And I was like, well, that wasn't a very good look. Let's go back and look at the game tape and see what happened here. And it was like, oh, this person challenged your authority. And I was like, okay, I need to make peace with that somewhere, that they have the right to challenge me on. And I need to be more well-informed on my opinion and why I think we should do it this way, and have a little more patience, have a little more compassion and explaining it. And it's, with my kids and with this work I do, like when we're training other facilitators, one of the mantras we try to give them is, are you proving or improving? And if you're proving, you're probably trying to control. And if you're improving, it's like you're just expressing your gifts. And with my kids, when they were young, I would give them a very wide berth, a very wide latitude. I did not try to control them unless I thought what they were doing was going to cause them great physical harm. Is this going to actually do damage to you? All right. Well, now I have to step in, and I'm going to step in very dramatically and forcefully. But otherwise, like, hey, you want to touch the hot girl? All right. Let's see how this turns out for you, kid. Oh, that was hot. Yes, it was. Don't do that again.
Despite my mom, she also had that philosophy it's interesting, like, it's not like we all live in one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she was very good about that. I'll let you touch the hot stove, but I'm not going to let you run in the street with the
Correct.
cars that can. But at the same time, if you go to run in the street, it's going to be dramatic and painful. You should associate street.
Yes,
because
we have to reinforce that. And like when it comes to cutting the mushrooms, it's like, well, if you cut the mushrooms like that, they're going to cook unevenly, and then we're going to have an uneven thing. But it's also, when someone asks, how should I cut these mushrooms? You're like, well, we cut them like this, so it creates this outcome, that we need a uniform cut so that when we put them in the pan, they cook through evenly. And some of them are burnt and others are raw in the middle. That would be one reason I would see to do that. But there's also, I've joked about, like, when I give someone a task, I can't watch them do it on the computer because I'm like, that is.
Oh, yeah. No,
well,
definitely not.
Take your hand off the mouse, sir.
This is
You are not competent to be a keyboard jockey, my friend.
Yeah. Are you trying to prove or improve? Makes me think of a thing I often ask people, which I didn't realize until now is kind of getting at this, which is, would you rather be right or useful? And I think that's are you trying to improve or prove very much? And like, you can tell when people, they know the right answer, and when they the struggle with the answer is really the revealing thing. It coming out of academia 10 plus years ago now, place just breeds be right mentality. There's a lot of controllers, and
I have very few positive things to say about academia or the education system in general, so we'll associate on past that one and spend the next 40 minutes going on a diatribe about the evils of the Prussian educational system, which leads us to the childhood origin or the survivor logic of the controller. So like all shadows, the controller isn't born, it's recruited. That early in life, the system learns a simple equation: if I take charge, I stay safe. For many controllers, their childhood environments were unpredictable, chaotic, or demanding. They may have had a parent who had substance abuse issues or mental health issues that caused them to have breaks with reality and not able to care for themselves. So they end up having to take care of themselves and maybe other siblings way before they needed to. So those are emotionally volatile and inconsistent caregivers, overbearing or controlling parents, that if someone's trying to control you all the time, you're going to either cave into that or completely rebel and resist and do everything your own way. Kid had to grow up too fast, take care of themselves, take care of everybody else. That they learned if they were around the type of people who, when they were vulnerable, it led to criticism, punishment, or abandonment. I think that is one of the, took me well into my adulthood years to realize that that was one of the patterns that my mom had, is that if you were vulnerable, you were going to be punished, which makes it tougher later on in life to be vulnerable with others, because you expect, like, all right, I'm going to be vulnerable, and then someone's going to beat the crap out of me for it. And that they experience betrayal, rejection, and powerlessness, which those first two, betrayal, short of a child dying, is the most terrible emotional experience that you can have in life. There is nothing that goes beyond that. That is the number one emotional pain that anybody can experience. After that becomes betrayal. And betrayal is so terrible because one of the things that betrayal does is it takes your reality and turns it into a fiction. That when someone betrays you and they betray your trust, everything that you thought was true previously becomes not true. And that that usual suspects moment where you have that big reveal and then everything in your past gets rewritten and refactored causes you to question yourself and causes you to question reality itself, and takes a long time to overcome that kind of pain. Rejection is so painful, it's hardwired into us that if we get rejected from the tribe, you're going to die. So every time we get rejected, it feels like, oh no, I'm dying, because it is literally hardwired into us that we're going to die if we get rejected. And so those two are both very difficult to deal with and can lead to somebody becoming a controller.
My wife was at a coffee shop, La La Land, the first ones in LA. Wait, they just opened, and she went in there and was all excited. And one of the baristas complimented her shirt, and she got all excited because it's this vintage shirt that she found, and it turned into this whole conversation. And it felt great. And then as she was sitting there, she noticed that all of the employees were complimenting everyone as they came in, and then did a little bit of internet sleuthing and found out that there's a corporate policy that every employee has to compliment every patron as they come in. And she instantly went from, that was so nice, this place is so awesome, to these guys, I'm never coming back here. And it's interesting how the exact same experience totally reframed with corporate folk.
So in growing up in those environments, what you learn is being soft is dangerous, and waiting around, waiting for things to develop, waiting for things to unfold is risky, because depending on other people didn't work. So the kid learned to adapt. They learned to stay alert, to anticipate problems, and not just anticipate problems, but to take action before it began to cut it off. They assert control before someone else did, and they became strong, capable, and self-reliant. And it wasn't ego. It's not ego in the sense of hubris. But it is ego in the sense that the ego is there to help you survive, that it was intelligence. So the controller formed an answer to a very real question: how do I make sure this never happens again? So the survival logic and the underlying belief is pretty simple and absolute. If I'm not in control, I will be controlled, and being controlled is unbearable. So the nervous system chose force over connection. It chose command over presence. I am not going to rely on you or on anyone else. That it's action over uncertainty. There is no paralysis of analysis. That's one of the great things about controllers. They're not going to sit there and analyze it and figure it out. They are going to take action, that they will jump off the cliff and figure it out on the way down. And this is why controllers often feel safest when they're in charge and when they're leading, that they experience vulnerability as weakness, and they interpret relaxation as danger. And they react very strongly when their autonomy or their freedom is threatened. That if you try and force one of these people to do something, you're going to have a very bad day. The body doesn't remember time, it remembers patterns. And every situation that resembles that early helplessness triggers the same response. Take charge, override, don't wait. And why this matters now is that what once protected you has outlived its usefulness. The adult world requires vigilance, but not constantly. It requires leadership that doesn't require constant control, and it requires connection that doesn't require domination. But your nervous system learns that somatically through your body, not intellectually. Integration doesn't mean betraying the child who learned to survive. It means letting that kid know you don't have to run the whole show anymore. You're not losing power, that you're safe enough to share.
It just dawned on me how often integration also means freedom.
The cost of staying unintegrated. What happens if this shadow just lives on without being recognized? The personal cost is that the unhealed controller often looks effective from the outside, and things move, decisions get made, results happen, that they are creating action in the world, that they do appear to be effective at getting things done. But the cost is cumulative, and as we've mentioned before, that interest is always compounding. And one of the things about living in control mode is that it keeps your nervous system in a perpetual state of activation, that you are always in fight or flight. The good news is that controllers rarely, if ever, freeze. It's usually fight, flight, or freeze being the most common one that people often do, even though it's not in the statement. Controllers almost never freeze. The bad news is that they are constantly wired for fight or flight, and they're always ready to go. This shows up as chronic anxiety, that they have a constant sense that something needs managing, correcting, or preventing. Even in moments that should feel safe, they are still on the lookout. It creates that sense of hypervigilance, which is a separate shadow of being on the lookout for things going wrong. It creates an inability to rest, creates restlessness, which is another shadow that we cover. That downtime feels unproductive or unsafe. I need to be doing something or something is wrong. That stillness gets interpreted as a loss of control, that you just can't be at rest. It creates an emotional narrowing, that being on that fight or flight, being in stress, narrows your vision of life and of your emotions. It's that lock in, we ball all the time. That strength, will, and urgency stay online, that they're always ready to lock in because they're always locked in. Meanwhile, tenderness, grief, joy, and uncertainty get suppressed. They feel a lot of isolation. One, they're carrying more than they need to because trusting others feels riskier than just doing it yourself. And they have a shrinking sense of freedom. Ironically, the more that you try to control outcomes, the more trapped you feel inside by responsibility, vigilance, and pressure. Control always means that there's a reduction or a less than, that opportunities and things that could have developed won't because they're being controlled away. The controller believes that being in control prevents collapse, but in reality, it prevents relief and expansion. And in relationships, what it does is that people around an unhealed controller often comply, but quietly they're going to disengage. That people feel resentment instead of commitment. I think that's one of the things that Riley was talking about in that meeting, that like, we're going to comply, but now we don't want to. That people do what you ask, but their creativity, their ownership, their enthusiasm disappear that you can't pay people to care. And I think I've mentioned malicious compliance on Reddit is one of my favorite subreddits when people are given, do it exactly like I told you to do it. And they're like, aye, Capitan. And then a complete catastrophe ensues to much amusement of everybody but the person who gave the instructions.
This feels like AI foreshadowing.
Yes. Yes. It creates emotional shutdown that others stop bringing their concerns, their ideas, or their vulnerability because it doesn't feel safe or it doesn't feel worth the effort. Like, I would talk to you about this, but why would I waste my time trying to explain it to you? It creates dependence or rebellion, that people become overly reliant on your direction. They're not going to do anything until you tell them what to do, or they're going to quietly, passively resist or sabotage to reclaim their own autonomy. And it creates that erosion of trust in others, that even when your intentions are good, others feel managed rather than met. And it's a tragedy, but a slow one. And because of this, the controller feels misunderstood and unappreciated, while others often feel controlled and unseen. And everyone is exhausted, and no one is enjoying this. At its core, staying unintegrated means confusing leadership with pressure and presence with dominance. The controller ends up alone with the very thing that they feared most, carrying everything without help, without ease, and without any real connection. And it's not a moral failure, it's a developmental one. And it's exactly why integration matters, because leadership that comes from regulation instead of control doesn't just get results, it gets everyone in the room to expand.
One of the points here is the isolation at the top. I think I've been guilty of this personally, but I see a lot of people do it too. That phrase, you see a lot of people who may truly be at the top and have that experience of not having many peers. And they say things like it's lonely at the top. And people who aspire to be at higher level use that as an excuse for their control shadow or issues. They're like, oh, it's lonely at the top. It's like, you are not at the top, sir. You are just a control freak.
This is another one of those things. I've never met anyone who proclaimed themselves an alpha that was actually an alpha.
Yeah,
Like, you go, I'm an alpha male, it's like, for sure you're not.
It always makes me giggle because I just think of alpha in the programming sense, where alpha has all the bugs and is not user friendly and is
The
terrible.
beta's not much better.
Yeah, we don't even release these to the public, okay?
Correct. That would be a more appropriate use of the term alpha. You were the firstborn.
You
and
are
the parents
bug
got it all wrong.
prone and barely functional.
Yes. You're a minimum viable product.
Emphasis on minimum.
Yes. Yeah, there's a difference between those, between you're isolated because you're trying to control everything and you can't get any cooperation because you're trying to control everything, as opposed to, this is one of the things that you have really made, that I have done in my life, but in my association with you, you've defined much more clearly, is like, how do we define success? And like, starting with, what is the outcome we are looking for? And then giving that vision to other people, going, this is the vision I'm looking for. And I had done that fairly well, but I think I do it much better now that I've had this association with you. Here's the tools that I'm giving you. Here's the resources that are available. Here's the time frame I would like you to do it in. Is there anything that you're lacking? Is this reasonable, and are you capable? All right, go. And I had all of those pieces, but I think they're much more clearly defined now with you.
On the integration thing, two famous examples come to mind: Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, who are both very much control freak ball hogs early in their career and had very high standards, but seemed to be very controlling teammates. And then in the second act, or as they matured, became much more, I can't think of a good word for it, but they evolved in a way that they still had extremely high standards. But there's that famous playoff game where Jordan kicks the ball out to Steve Kerr, who hits a three to win game 6 or game 7 or whatever it is, that he never would have done earlier in his career. And people said the same thing about Kobe and Jordan, that like they were and miserable to play with, but they won. And like the difference between like control freak and like elite champion was that shift in confidence or mindset or something. It seems like something changed in them, that the behavior and the standards were still very much the same, but something shifted.
So the thing that shifted with Jordan is Phil Jackson had been coaching him for 2 years and was desperate to get him to be a team player. And he was not taking that coaching from Phil Jackson. And it was the end, I believe it took place at the end of the second season. And they were having a team meeting with the whole team. And Phil Jackson turned on game video, started the game video. And it alternated between Michael hogging the ball and missing. And then it would cut to this cue of a movie where this woman was committing suicide by cutting her own throat. And then it would cut back to Michael hogging the ball, and then cut to the cue video of this woman cutting her throat, committing suicide, and going back. I forget what the movie was, but he took it from a movie clip and was going back and forth between those two. Turned the video off, was like, all right, guys, that's the season. And Michael Jordan was a team player the next year. So what is the integrated gift of the controller, that once they integrate this shadow, what do they get out of it? Like all things with our shadow, we're not trying to reduce it. We're not trying to ostracize it. We're not trying to send it to the shadow realm, never to be seen again. We're trying to give it a promotion so it has a new job. That integration doesn't erase the controller. It gives them a promotion. The drive is still there. The clarity is still there. The capacity to lead under pressure is still there. What changes is what the energy is protecting. When integrated, the controller no longer guards against chaos. It creates the conditions for coherence. No more micromanaging people. No more bracing impact against life. No more mistaking force for effectiveness. And maybe no more road rage. The unhealed controller becomes the servant leader. The servant leader creates the conditions for everyone to thrive. Instead, that same intensity becomes calm authority. You don't need to dominate the room to be felt. Your presence organizes the space before you speak. Protective leadership. You sense where systems, people, or processes are breaking down, and you intervene early, cleanly, and without blame. And then finally, you have authority or power, that you are no longer reacting to the fear of being controlled. You choose when to act, when to delegate, and when to let life unfold. The servant leader understands something that a tyrant or a controller never could. Power isn't maintained by tightening the grip. It's maintained by regulating the nervous system. That by getting out of fight or flight and into calm, going from survive to thrive, or from stress to blessed, this is leadership that creates capacity in others instead of compliance. It's strength that invites trust instead of fear, standards that elevate rather than exhaust. It's a measure to strive for, not to get beaten down by. It's the same engine at a higher altitude with less friction. The controller hasn't disappeared. They've just been promoted to servant leader. Which takes us to how can you deal with the shadow through breathwork? If you recognize yourself in some of this and you would like to use breathwork to help promote that controller energy to servant leader, that your breathwork session when you come in isn't going to be about letting go of power. It's about updating how power lives in your body. That control is not a mindset problem. It's a nervous system strategy. And at some point, your body learned, if I stay alert, if I stay in charge and ready to override everybody, nothing bad can happen. And that strategy worked until it didn't, or it just cost you more than it's worth. Today's intention is to teach the nervous system a new truth. Leadership doesn't require constant activation. And you're going to name the old program that before you begin breath work, bring awareness to the controller posture in your body. That a lot of times controllers, they have a tight or clenched jaw, that the front of their neck is tight. A lot of times controllers, their head is pushed excessively forward. If you see someone standing there and their ears are out in front of their shoulders, that tension in their neck, they're braced for impact, that their chest is lifted but rigid, their belly is tight right around the rib cage, Shoulders can have good posture, but they're braced and strong. And their breath is held at the top or pushed on the inhale. And you can just silently acknowledge to yourself that this is how you learn to stay safe and effective, and that you're not trying to fix it. You're just recognizing that it is. When you come into breath work, you're going to set an intention. It's one of the most important things that you can do, breath work, that an intention is a compass, not a command. You're going to hold it lightly. Here are a couple of the intentions that you can set for dealing with the controller during breath work or helping the controller get promoted. I am grateful that my body knows how to lead with grace. I am grateful that calm authority feels safe and available. I am grateful that I can trust others without losing myself. I am grateful that my breath supports clarity and flow. And when we do breath work, we want to let that intention live in our body, not in our mind. That you take that intention, imagine in the moment in the future where it's true, and see how that feeling resonates in your body. That how does it feel? That if you set that intention and you feel anxiety, tension, stress around the intention, that may be too far for you to go to set that intention. Dial it back a little bit. Set an intention that's less ambitious, that isn't quite as far out. If it feels good and comfortable, beautiful. That's what we're looking for. And that as you do breath work, we're going to do conscious connected breath work so that every breath is connected. On the inhale, you're going to feel your strength, your capacity, and your presence. And as you exhale, you're just going to allow your relaxation to expand. And if while you're trying to do breath work, it tries to take over, you're trying to force it, you're trying to optimize it, you're trying to hit a specific cadence, notice that as the controller surfacing, that there is no right way, there is no wrong way to do breath work, there is no perfect breath, which is actually not true. There is a perfect breath. I'm just not going to tell you what it is because then you'll try to do it. And that you can gently remind yourself, I don't need to manage the breath. Your breath knows what to do. And that every exhale where you're relaxing and letting go of that breath is a micro practice of releasing and leadership without domination. As you continue with breath work, you're going to get a nervous system update that at the peak of the sensation, when sensations or motions or resistance come up, you're going to offer this internal reframe that you can stay present without taking control, that you can lead without overriding, and that you are safe in collaboration with life. And you can let the body experience this as a felt sense, but not a belief. That you're not surrendering, you're just allowing. That there's a difference between surrender or capitulation and acceptance, and we're just going to accept this as it is. And as you come back from breath work, you're going to rest your space on the space after the exhale. And this is the transition to the servant leader's home, that you're not frozen, you're not passive, that you're going to be alert without urgency, and that you are strong without strain. And it's the nervous system learning a new way to hold power, and that's the real intention. So, what can you do in the week to deal with this in between breath works? That we recommend doing breath work once a week for optimal results. And to go from controller to servant leader, it's not about giving up your power, it's about relocating it. So first, you're going to notice your controlling instincts when they come up without flinching. That once per day, maybe pause and ask, where am I treating people as obstacles or as objects instead of partners? Where do I feel threatened by someone else's autonomy, pace, or perspective? Where am I tightening my grip because I'm afraid of being irrelevant, bypassed, or overruled? And you're just going to look at it objectively, plainly. You don't need to justify it. You don't need to attack it. You don't need to condemn it. You just need to see it as it is. You don't need to be punished. You just need to be seen. Step 2 is you're going to soften, that we're going to develop skills. And in that same situation, ask, if I remove intimidation or trying to control, what competence remains? And then ask what structure, clarity, or direction actually helps here. And what am I trying to control that isn't mine to carry? This is where the controller begins to mature, that you still set standards, This is what success looks like. This is where the finish line is. You're still going to have that standard, but you're going to name reality and make decisions, but you stop confusing force with effectiveness. And that you practice one moment this week where you give direction without pressure. You state expectations without emotional charge. You allow someone else to choose how they meet the standard. And notice what happens in your body when you don't overmanage. It can feel deeply uncomfortable, and you may just have to sit with that discomfort while somebody else figures it out. Step 3, this is where you're going to begin to actually practice servant leadership. It's a power that multiplies. That once this week, you're going to intentionally shift roles. Ask someone you normally direct, what do you need from me to do this well? Where would you like more ownership? What am I doing that unintentionally makes this harder? Then do something radical. Listen without correcting, support without steering, hold the container without filling it. That servant leadership isn't passive. It's creating the conditions for success, and it's knowing when not to act.
The first one you were asking Josh, how does it get into our brain? I don't think that's the first place it goes. I think it went into my nervous system first, and my brain started to fall in line because the first thing I had to do was to train myself to allow safety. Just because I was in a safe place physically and emotionally, like I didn't walk in here and feel like that immediately. I had to give my nervous system opportunities to be exposed to that and then to see that nothing bad happened. And in fact, good things happened and kept happening. So that's my 2 cents on that. And then the other thing to add to what Jake was saying about that time horizon, like elongated. Josh asked me a question a couple weeks ago now, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, about when did I become aware that what I was doing here in the studio was making a change. I think in the moment I was a little flustered because I suddenly became very aware that I hadn't really thought about it. Not with any meaning,
When did you realize that thing's on your face? Wait, what thing's on my face?
Exactly. You get it.
Glass shatters.
Exactly. So after having that opportunity to chew on it for a little bit, it does really come down to the elongation of that time horizon. Like really what it came down to is that I stopped having to go to therapy because I didn't need to crash out every week. I could hold myself together. I could support my own emotions and free myself from my own cycles of rumination so that I didn't feel like I had to go sit across some professional on a couch and let all my crazy out. Like I learned to be able to cycle it and deal with it and address it and let go of it because I no longer was trying to think my way through it. And that just goes back to allowing my nervous system to figure stuff out first and my brain falling in line. Like I spent a lot of time thinking about feeling, and turns out that's not the same as feeling. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I think that goes back to reading a book about massage will not help your muscles relax.
100% true.
Thinking about feelings is not the same as having feelings.
No, it's not. And it does not provide the same outcome.
I will say one of the aspects of the brain that makes breath work so unusually effective is the area of your brain that controls the breath when you are doing it consciously is next door neighbors to the part of your brain that controls emotions. They're living in a duplex.
Really?
I did not know that.
So last, personal reflection and anecdote on this, a lot of the controller behavior that I recognize in myself that was most acutely pre any breathwork healing work, which was probably 2017, 18 when it started. I didn't have any of these words that you just presented. It all kind of tracks and makes sense, but I didn't come into any breath work with any of this intention or objective. I really just did breath work and a variety of things because it felt good and it was interesting and I just kept doing it. I think the combination of a morning practice of some reflection and journaling consistently with breath work regularly, a bunch of the things that you keyed in on integration, I've done over the last few years that I didn't do previously. Like asking someone, what do you need from me for you to be successful in this task or in this job. I do that all the time now. And 10 years ago, like, no way, no
Well,
chance. But it's noteworthy and compelling that I've done a lot of this integration unintentionally. I didn't come in wanting to fix the controller in me. I just did the thing. And now I'm like, stuff got fixed in the process.
One of the things that makes best practices is that if there was a point where some facilitators and we did our training together, we all went off and did our own thing for 6 months. Then we all came back, shared our results, and at one state we all pulled, hey, I got something to show you guys, and we all pulled out the exact same tool independently. That best practices develop and become best practices because they are the best practices. Like, your results may vary, you may do a different variation on this, and I'm being very intentional about helping people with this, but even if you don't notice yourself as a controller, because again, controllers never do, if you just come in and do breath work with no intentions for 6 months, your life is going to improve. That self-awareness is going to develop, and that self-awareness is going to lead to divine awareness, which is what transcendence is, and that is going to improve your life. That I'm always looking for what is the minimum dose for the optimal result. And if you go into it with more intention and more intentionality, I think more intentionality in people's lives overall is good, is an ultimate good. Like, am I intentional about my life, which is different from controlling of, I have an objective in the future that I am focused on. How do I get there? And maybe I go on side quests that are entertaining or not so entertaining, but like I still have what I'm looking for in life. And that a lot of life is self-discovery, that you are discovering more about yourself at deeper layers of yourself. And that self-discovery doesn't become a deification of the self, of how wonderful and awesome I am. It becomes a complementary element of you in a community. That if you know all about yourself as an island, it's not that fulfilling. That it's only when you have that deep knowledge of yourself and then you become part of a team, you become part of a community, you become part of an organization in which, through the depth of knowledge of yourself, you're now valuable. You are more valuable, that it has complemented your strengths. And that's what the servant leader does, is I am compounding my power to lift other people up. But it's like, oh, we can put him in this position and that's going to be awesome. And because you know yourself, you know your gifts, you know your values, you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, you have that knowledge of self, that it makes you a more valuable person, not just to yourself, but to everybody else around you.
It's hard for me, and I swear I'll shut up after this, we'll get a wrap, but like having these big objectives or goals weren't ever really front or even back of my mind with this. I'm curiosity and challenge driven. And so breathwork was challenging in the beginning. It was super interesting. And so I was like, I don't know where this goes, but I'm just going to keep doing it because it kind of feels good and feels kind of bad if I go too long without doing it. So I'm just going to do it. And then all of a sudden, it's the old, like, if all you're ever doing is gradient descent, like I'm only going to maximize how steep I'm going up this mountain. You're probably never going to get to the top because you probably need to find some switchbacks and a different path to actually get there. And so when you're just maximizing for the goal, the intent, you kind of miss it, as opposed to, well, I'm just going to wander and look around and ask, like, am I in a different place that's higher or lower? And after a handful of years of doing this and looking around and talking to you, really, it's, oh, I'm in a different, better place. That's weird. Yeah. And it's hard for me to relate that to a lot of people, because I'm like, yeah, aren't you just going to do things that are interesting because they're interesting? And most people are like, no, right, I'm not going to do that.
Well, it requires finding a hobby that is entertaining and enriching is difficult. Like it's, let me use a different analogy. The keeping up with the Joneses, that many people think that's an envy-based thing. That, hey, my neighbor's done this. You know, I looked at a neighborhood the other day, and it was a neighborhood where the wall backed up to the street, and I could see that about 10 of the 9 homes had one of those outdoor heater things, and then on the next block over, none of them had it. And I was like, one of those neighbors got an outdoor heater, and then all the other neighbors did as well. And a lot of times, if you're the first one to take action, which I usually am, and Kim usually is, Kim gets really upset about this. I don't. People copy what we do. Like, they copied us. I'm like, yeah, it was a good idea. That's why they copied it. That there is part of that. Some people explain that through envy. Like, oh, I have something they don't, so now they have to get it. Most people don't have their own ideas. They don't have that initiative of like, hey, this would be cool to do. So they see that and they go, hey, I want to sit in my backyard and not be cold. That's a good idea. I'll go do that. And then they follow suit. So there's a lot of monkey see, monkey do. Some of it is envy of like, I can't let you get ahead of me. But then some of it is like, hey, that's a good idea. We should do that too. And what is it that's driving that keeping up? How much of it is an expression of you as you are, and how much of it is like, I'm not going to be left behind. As we close, I want to leave you with an image and a poem. In Percy Shelley's Ozymandias. Usually I just read the poem, but this one's a little bit more complicated, so I'm going to explain it before I read it. A great king tries to make his power permanent. He builds a huge monument and carves his authority into stone and declares himself the king of kings. And what's left? There's no kingdom, there's no influence, there's no legacy. In fact, most of his statue isn't even there. Just a shattered statue in the desert and a sneer cold command half buried in sand. So with that, we'll read Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frowned and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command. Tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone, the level sands stretch far away. That's the controller frozen in time. Control always believes it's doing something noble. If I don't take charge, everything will fall apart. If I loosen my grip, I'll be overrun. If I stop commanding, I'll be taken advantage of. But control doesn't age well. It fossilizes, it isolates, it becomes brittle, and eventually life does what life always does. It erodes the statue. The controller doesn't disappear. The strength stays, the clarity, the capacity to lead stays. What falls away is the illusion that power comes from the controller is promoted and transformed into the servant leader. Calm authority instead of force, protective leadership instead of coercion, authority instead of anxiety. Not look on my works in despair, but look around and rise. A servant leader doesn't need to command the current. They trust it. They shape conditions instead of people. They create space where others can access their own strength. So if you recognize the control in yourself, if you feel the tight neck, the held breath, the need to manage the room, let this be the practice. On the inhale, feel your capacity to lead, first yourself and then others, and on the exhale, become the sand. Let the breath erode what no longer needs to be held. Let calm replace control. Let authority emerge without force, because legacy isn't built by the statues we erect. It's built by the people who stand taller when we stop trying to stand above them. How you breathe is how you live. Take a powerful breath.